precious few minutes, and we want to make them count. God works in each of us. It starts at our baptism, and we're pro-life. We're Catholics. We're for life, not for culture death, for life. And the call to be for life extends across the board, from children before they're born, because they're voiceless, they're silent, but they're calling to be born, they're called for life, and then all the way till the time of death, that it should be a natural death, that when God calls us, we die. I've been in the death chamber and accompanied 6 people to execution. And this is when the state determines that they're going to die. And it's very different from accompanying somebody like in a hospital when they're sick and they're dying and their life is fading. You can see it fading away. But when the state is going to kill someone, they're totally alive. And then they walk across the room and the state ends their life. And one spiritual reflection to put on that is, because the death penalty is a tough issue, what right do we have to decide that God's finished with a person at this point in their life? That they're irredeemable from here on? We've decided that. We've determined that they must be because of the nature of their crime, and therefore they must be killed. Let me tell you about my journey. All of us journeyed. We hear the call. I never heard the reading as I did today with Jesus, and it was argument. The Pharisees just trying to pick an argument with him, try to get him on something. And he said, well, what does Moses say in the law about divorce? Because, see, women weren't protected at all when you had divorce. Men could do whatever they wanted, just write a bill, and the woman was out, and without a man in that patriarchal society, she didn't have a chance. He said, well, what did Moses do in the law? And so then they say, and then he said, but Moses did that because of the hardness of your heart. So Jesus is moving us into a deeper personal realm of hearts and flesh united in marriage that's beyond a legalism. And the same thing has happened in the Catholic Church with the death penalty. Because on moral issues, we're always growing. There used to be a day we supported slavery. The church, I live in the deep South. Whites would go to the white church, and slaves, there's still some little churches where the slaves would go on Sunday and people would quote St. Paul, and this is the will of God. Some people are meant to be the servants of others. And we grew into that because of the experience with people that we began to see, wait, slaves are persons too. And so we grow. And on the death penalty issue is a growth, a cusp of growth in our church. My journey is Catholic nun, teaching in a Catholic school, loving it, being a director of religious ed in a parish, loving it. And then the call came that the gospel of Jesus was to be on the side of the poor. I grew up as a young white woman of privilege in Baton Rouge. My daddy was a successful lawyer. I knew we had an inner city of New Orleans where 50% of the people, African American, were living in poverty, but I had never been there. And when I got the realization that Jesus is always going to be on the side of the people who are struggling and suffering, and I moved in then to the St. Thomas housing projects. When I grew up in the Jim Crow days in Louisiana, the only African people, American people I knew closely were Ethel, who worked in the house, and Jesse, who worked in the yards. I didn't even know their last name. So living among poor and struggling African Americans, I felt like I'd moved to another country in a lot of ways. All the rules were different, the way the police treated people. Kids were in the public schools and would get to be a junior and they couldn't read a third grade reader. And I was awakening to justice. That is, what is required of us is more than charity and just being kind to the people around us. We must practice charity at home, true, but justice. And I began to see what was happening in the public schools, the way the police were treating people, the tenants in public housing. And it's while I was there that I got an invitation to write a man on death row in Louisiana. I wrote, it was the early 80s, I really didn't know he'd be executed. I just thought I was going to be writing letters. I just want to just put a little word out there. God's sneaky. You got to watch. You could, write a letter. Somebody on death row, yeah. Well, the man wrote back. That was the problem. And we had a correspondence. We had a connection. See, we are so separated from people on death row. You have 714 human beings here in California. You're never going to go there? Even though all the people in prison, it separates us. I was separated. Then I wrote the letter. Then he wrote back. Then I visited him. And this journey's going to take me straight into his execution. In fact, it's going to be the prequel of the book I'm writing now, which is about my spiritual journey. And it goes like this. They killed a man with fire one night, strapped him in a wooden chair. His killing was a legal act. They pumped electricity into his body till he was dead. No religious leader protested his killing that night, but I was there. I saw it with my own eyes, and what I saw set my heart on fire, a fire that burns in me still. And then I just say this, here's an account of the spiritual journey that led me to the killing chamber that night and the spiritual currents that pulled me there. And I came out of that execution chamber after witnessing that man's death, and I vomited. I'd never watched a killing in front of my eyes. You are never going to see that. There have been at least 3 court actions in California to make executions public, and they were all defeated. It's a private, secret ritual that happens behind prison walls. But I had been drawn into it, so I had the mission to bring the people close and to tell the story. And I want you to think of this, the death penalty, that we're pro-life. Innocent life, yeah, but boy, what about guilty life? And think of it as the cross has 2 arms, and the gospel of Jesus stretches us. On one arm is the perpetrator who has human rights, who should be tortured, should be killed. Okay, we're going to try to do that. On the other arm of the cross is the victim's family. And one of the things that has kept the death penalty in place here in the United States these 30-something years, where we've killed 1,200 people in our names, is you got to do it for the victim's family. Isn't this justice for the victim's family? And I want to tell you a story. He's the hero of Dead Man Walking. He's the first victim's family person I ever met that took me into the journey, how an ordinary human being, with God's grace, can get out of that crucible of hatred and bitterness and come to another place. His name is Lloyd LeBlanc. His son David was killed by the man that I visited on death row, Patrick Saunier, and his brother was involved too. And when I met Lloyd LeBlanc, he said, "Sister, everybody's been saying to me, Lloyd, you got to be for the death penalty or it'll look like you didn't love your son." I'd never thought of that. Here's a victim. Now his only son has been killed. And what is the culture saying? Well, when you've suffered the ultimate loss, you got to be for the ultimate punishment, right? And he said, "Sister, I've tried to go there. I'm a good Catholic, go to Mass every Sunday, went to the Christian Brothers School. I went there. I said, they're right. Look how Eula, my wife, is suffering. Look how we're suffering. Look, they killed our son." And then he said, "But I didn't like what was happening to me when I went there, because I'm getting in that place where I say I want to pull the switch. I don't care if their mother suffers. I just want to see him suffer pain." And I always have been a loving man, a kind man. And after a while, I just said, they killed our boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. I'm going to do what Jesus said. And after I got to know him really well, he told me about when the sheriff's deputy came after David had been killed by the man that I'm accompanying now, Patrick Saunier, and his brother. And they brought him to the morgue to identify his boy, and there he was, there on that slab in the morgue. And he said the prayer that rose to my lips was what I had learned as a little boy, and that I say every Mass, every Sunday Mass: "Our Father, said, when I came to the words, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. He said, I said the words. He said, I didn't feel the words. But the words of prayer are a path for us, a direction that we want to take. And God's grace met him on that path. The death penalty is in diminishment all around the United States. And part of the reason it is more and more victims' families are standing up and just testifying, as they did in New Jersey 4 years ago. When New Jersey did away with the death penalty, 62 murder victims' families testified before the legislative body and said, don't kill for us. Many of them said the death penalty re-victimizes us because we're given this promise for this healing, for this closure. You call it justice. And we wait 10 years, 15 years. California, the average waiting time for execution is 20 years. And they said, we wait and we wait. And then what happens? And there's one victim's family, Bud Welch's daughter Julie was killed in the Oklahoma City bombing, said, even if I'd witnessed the execution of Timothy McVeigh, when I came home, I'd still have to deal with the empty chair where Julie once sat. So they are teaching us. We've been at this 30 years in this country. And so on the gospel of Jesus calls us to reach out to victims of violence. My big shock after I met Lloyd LeBlanc to go to these support meetings of people who had people murdered, everybody said everybody stays away from us. Nobody knows what to do with our pain. Can we reach out to victims of violence? And can we also reach out to those who've done the violence? I got a chance, it's in the second book, Death of Innocence, to have a direct dialogue with Pope John Paul. And that was my question to him. Your Holiness, does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of innocent life? That's what the Catechism says, innocent life. Well, when I'm walking with a man to execution, and he's shackled hand and foot, and surrounded by guards, and he says, Sister, please pray God holds up my legs. He's been rendered completely defenseless. Where's the dignity in this death? And the Holy Father himself, Pope John Paul, and then also Pope Benedict, we have a way to defend ourselves as a society without having to kill. Where else in the criminal justice system do we ever let the behavior of the criminal determine how we act? We're imitating them in their violence. It's like legitimizing, and as much as we can, that violence is redemptive, and even to let victims' families witness as the state is killing the one who killed their loved one, just enshrines violence as a solution to our problems. The Catholic bishops have spoken strongly. More violence just promotes more violence. And so now we come to a moment of history, a moment of grace in California, with a chance to replace death with life, literally replacing death with life in Proposition 34. I have been in California for a week, going to churches all across Southern California to talk to people about this. And I want to ask you to reflect on it, and hopefully you will be at a place where you can choose life by actively getting involved. We have Proposition 34, and you can read about it, because we have a much greater soul struggle to embrace on one arm of the cross people who have done terrible crimes. It never means condoning what they do. And we are outraged over terrible crimes, and that is part of moral decency, to be outraged. But then to kill them too, Jesus, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. And we have Pope John Paul, when he stood in St. Louis in 1999 for the first time, put the death penalty in with the pro-life issues. Now, here's our stretch. This is our growth. And he said no to abortion, no to euthanasia, no to physician-assisted suicide, and no to the death penalty. because it's cruel and it's unnecessary. We have a way to defend ourselves. Even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. So as my fellow Catholics who stand for life, I invite you into deeper reflection in this journey and to take part, to act. St. Basil in the 4th century said, "Annunciations are frequent, incarnations are rare." What might that mean in your life? God bless you.